Welcome to this week's episode of Inside the Headset presented by CoachComm. This week, we sit down with Furman Defensive Coordinator Duane Vaughn. In this conversation, Coach Vaughn discusses his career with Furman, how he has continued to develop as a coach, and his experience in the AFCA 35 under 35. But first, a word from CoachComm.
Deuce left, check with me. If they're in quarters match, we're going to Pittsburgh or Ohio.
They're in zero.
Let's go Hippo, Seattle, wide choice. If we call the protection right, it's 6.
When a play call is the difference between winning and losing, your headset choice could be your most important decision. When the call counts, CoachComm is the only choice for clear, dependable communication. Visit CoachComm.com for more info.
We got it, guys. Good job.
Now, let's get inside the headset with Coach Vaughn.
Coach Vaughn, what's going on, brother? How are you?
Doing good, Mario. Good to see you, man.
It's always good to see you, man. I'm excited about spending a little time with you and talking all things coaching with you, man. Let's go ahead and dive into the first question. When did you know you want to be a part of this great profession?
So for me, it was actually pretty early in life. My first real true coach in my life was my dad. He coached me playing really every sport, football, basketball, baseball. And I just saw the impact he made on me as a young man and really just all my friends. And I just thought it was one of the coolest things that my dad got to work, his normal job and then, got a chance to in the afternoons come home, pick us up from school, take us to the ball fields, teach us skills, but more importantly, teach us those life lessons. And so that was something, as I got a little bit older into high school and started realizing, man, I can not only do this as a part-time job or a hobby, this is something I could do as a career. I'd say really from an early age, I think a lot of people don't really know what they want to go into or know they want to go the college route. I'd say I'm probably a little bit different. Definitely felt like I knew early on that was what I wanted to do.
And you were distinctively clear you wanted to do collegiate ball or you were didn't matter what
I think I preferred collegiate ball. So a little bit about background. I played at Vanderbilt. I majored in secondary education and history, so I did a student teaching and got certified as a high school history teacher. And I think it was during that experience, I just realized if I had my preference, I wanted to be able to try the college route out. And obviously that's what I did right out of college. And it's just kind of worked out that way for me. And, love the age, kind of 18 to 22-year-old student athletes just because it's such a pivotal time in their life.
Yeah.
As they're away from home for the first time.
Yeah, that's it's interesting how you can, even if you have plans, sometimes it can just kind of go either way. I think a lot of people probably prepared to be high school coaches, maybe get an opportunity or a break to do college and don't want to come back or on the first thing smoking to get back to high school. It can always play out just very differently at that point in time. But you got a quick start in the profession, man. And one of the things that's interesting, I always say is, the first job is always the hardest one to get. And you had a unique situation where you were able to be at Furman early on, and you've been at Furman your whole career. We'll talk a little bit about that, but you got to be at Furman, at 22, 23 years old. How did that opportunity come about?
Yes. It was my senior spring. I was student teaching. And so obviously I was starting to kind of apply for jobs and, I really, applied for 3 jobs. I applied for a high school teaching coaching job at Ravenwood High School in Nashville, Tennessee. I went up to Kentucky to an NAIA school, Lindsey Wilson, a really good NAIA program in Kentucky, interviewed with them. And then at the same time, my defensive coordinator at Vanderbilt, Bruce Fowler, that spring got the head coaching job here at Furman. Also at the same time, James Franklin had just taken the job at Vanderbilt. So there was a staff transition there. I was originally trying to actually stay on in GA for Coach Bob Shoop. But, things didn't really work out there. And, I always say kind of when God closes one door, he opens another door. And there was an opportunity for me to come here to Furman. And it's kind of unique was my defensive coordinator wanted to put me on the offensive side of the ball because as a quality control tight ends coach, he thought I would add value to the staff room with being able to break down opposing defenses,
Right.
And help from that perspective. So obviously I took the opportunity right after I graduated in May. I moved here June of 2011. And as you alluded to, and we'll get into later, coming up on really my 14th, heading into my 14th season here.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. I think it's a testament to kind of who you can be as a player. Obviously I didn't know you, but I think anytime a coach feels confident enough to, especially move away and grab a player on the staff or grab a player from the previous school and say this guy would be a good fit for us, probably says a little bit about what kind of guy you were. And I was going to say kid, but young adult and that transformation age range that you were talking about. Now, how did you get on his radar, Coach Fowler's radar, that you wanted to be a part of the profession? You were serious about it, because obviously, it wasn't just all right, cool, man, come on over. I see you on Monday, like he was staying at Vandy. You had to get in the car, pack your bags, and make a big move. How did you put that on his radar that you were interested in it?
Yes. So I think it was my spring of my junior year, heading into my senior year, doing kind of exit meetings of the spring with both your position coach and your defensive coordinator. And, and obviously I was getting feedback on how I was doing as a player. But, I remember he always ended every meeting with, hey, what's on your mind? Anything you want to ask? And, I just, brought up to him, hey, I'm very interested in getting into coaching. And he's, kind of told me, hey, I could definitely see you have kind of some of those qualities just in terms of work ethic, attention to detail. So he actually let me start, getting a little bit, some assignments, just whether it was putting in personnel into the film breakdown system, heading into my senior year, watching film, and I didn't play a ton. I played mostly on special teams, but we had a pretty good DB room. So just being able to, even create cut-ups and create player tapes, get pretty good with the video software. So I think that, really was able to get kind of a leg up on most players that, are so focused on their playing career, they don't get to turn their attention to it until their playing career finishes. So I think just made an impression on him heading into my senior year, and just kind of continued the conversation when he took the job. And, obviously he's been kind of like a second father figure to me over the years in terms of bringing me in. And I think literally when I moved here, I literally stayed with him for the first month or two.
Oh yeah, that's awesome, man. Well, that's pretty unique, man. We've done the podcast here for a while. I'm always curious. I'm gonna hear something that's just so unique I hadn't heard yet, and I hadn't heard many players talk about the opportunity to still be playing. Obviously there's been a lot where they have some type of career in an injury, or they decide to quit football so they can focus on the coaching. But you were kind of looking in the film room at the offensive formation and stuff. You're like, oh, I typed that in there, so you're getting a little bit of that exposure. And one of the interesting things too, I think, and this applies for myself, I think it was eye-opening for me once I got into the coaching profession, just how much time and detail was spent behind the scenes to put what hash the football was on. A small thing that you take for granted as a player, but then all of a sudden you see all that work behind the scenes. Did that truly give you a leg up just to get a little bit of taste of kind of what goes on behind the scenes prior to actually getting into the profession?
Absolutely. I think as a player early in my career, I was very, very naive in terms of what our coaches did from when they first got into the office, like you said, up until those position meetings when we showed up as players. And I think that's probably the biggest question you get from people not in the profession. They're like, hey, so what do you do year round? And they just like, besides going out to practice, I think a lot of people think we just as football coaches show up and wing it, and that couldn't be farther from the truth. So it definitely gave me that exposure, just, how much thought and attention to detail goes into every decision you make as a staff. And, because when you're operating nowadays 150 to 175 person organization, when you include not just players, coaches, but all the support staff, if you're not organized and detail focused, it's not going to run efficiently. And that's especially at a high academic school like a Vanderbilt, like a Furman, where, that's probably the biggest thing we fight here is class schedules. So we've got to be very organized and efficient with our time, because we got guys taking labs. We got guys taking classes throughout the afternoon. So that's kind of what I would say, just in terms of, we definitely opened my eyes to it, and it's continued, I think, helping me continuing to be at a high academic school.
Yeah, no doubt about it, man. Well, you mentioned that Coach Fowler kind of mentioned how helpful it'd be to take your expertise, at least from a defensive standpoint, your experience, and putting you on the offensive side of the ball as an offensive assistant, just to help out in that facet. How helpful was it for you, especially, obviously I want to keep this chronologically as possible, but especially as you sit in that seat that you sit in these days where you've had that opportunity to sit on the offensive side and just kind of at least think like them for a little bit. How advantageous was that for you in the end game?
I think it was huge. And I'd start off with, my advice to every young coach, if you have a choice in terms of which position group you work with in any role, I always kind of recommend this advice is work with a group that you're going to take your position group to both inside drill and 7-on-7. And really all my position groups I've coached before I became coordinator, tight ends, safeties, outside linebackers, take part in both of those drills because it just gets you tied into both the run and the pass. If you're only a corner guy, you're only an O-line guy, you're kind of in your world. But don't get the holistic view. So I think that's something that definitely helped me. And then I think really being a DB guy that played safety, coaching the tight ends early in my career, really introduced me to let me dive deep into obviously O-line play, understanding, blocking scheme rules. How are you going to deck stuff, mic stuff? How are you going to work your double teams? How are you going to, check in and out of run checks against, good or bad looks. And like I said, that was really the first 4 years. And I think that's helped me a ton as a defensive coordinator, understanding, how offenses are going to attack you. And I think also, what are things that give them problems? We're going to be a multi-front, multi-coverage pressure defense. And I think that comes from those were the defenses when I coached tight ends that our offensive staff hated seeing. They loved seeing that, defense that was going to line up in one front, one coverage, static, and you knew where they were going to be.
Hey, yeah. And so as you're, taking that knowledge in, obviously, from that holistic approach, I mean, I've never heard it really framed like that, but I definitely repeat, just make sure you get the opportunity to do both inside and 7-on-7, because that's a very interesting way to put it, because you are seeing all 11 in just two totally different ways. Now, how did you prepare to get guys in stance and start? Good tight end drills, just the things that you're going to have to do day to day to run a film session with those guys. How did you make sure you were a very, very good tight end coach for those guys?
Yes. I really felt like I had two really good mentors in Scott Smouse and Jimmy Kaiser, our receivers coach OC, and then our O-line coach. And I thought they did a really good job of, grooming me. I think my first year, it kind of started where I would take the tight ends. We would meet with the O-line. We'd watch basically all the run game. Obviously, I felt much more comfortable teaching the pass game, being able to run routes.
Yeah.
And I was able to provide kind of, okay, here's what the DB's thinking, and hey, you've got to play on his fear of you're going to run by him on every single one of your routes, and being able to get in and out of breaks and ball drills. So definitely felt like my weakness was going to be more the stance, the blocking, the footwork. And I was very fortunate to have some really good players my first couple of years. So, that always helps things, makes you look like a whole lot better of a coach when they've had a 2-time All-American at tight end, and it wasn't because of me. I was very fortunate to inherit him.
Right. Yeah, I was just going to say, you guys had a 2013 SoCon champs, or 2013 SoCon champs, and made an FCS playoff appearance, and then you coached 2 second-team all-conference players, and an All-American player. So a lot of times it makes you a really good coach when you got some really good players walking through that. And we'll talk about that in a second, as you spend a lot of your career as a recruiting coordinator for Furman. But one of the lines I'm seeing in delineation in early in that career is that in 2011 you were an offensive assistant, and then in 2012 through 15 you were the tight ends coach. So at some point in time you got some type of promotion, right? Talk a little bit about that promotion, the conversation, dialogue about it, and the responsibilities that changed.
Right. Absolutely. So when I came here, I was as you said, offensive quality control, kind of working with the tight ends, but not the tight ends coach per se. And again, I think it goes back to kind of my two mentors. We sat down and kind of came up with a plan, and they laid it out very clearly of, hey, if you show that you are capable of running your own room, holding these guys accountable, the recruiting piece, there's absolutely a runway for you to, upward promotion to be the tight ends coach, which I think is all anybody wants as a competitor is an opportunity and a chance, and to know that, hey, if I can bloom where I'm planted right here, I'm going to, be able to progress my career and get a bigger role and a bigger responsibility. So I just really took the challenge head on and, worked the heck out of my group and my position, learned as much as I could from some really good football coaches, both here at Furman and outside. I remember 2011 was my first year coming to the AFCA coaches convention and networking and sitting in on a bunch of the skills and drills and the chalk talks, and was able to bring those back and implement those. And at the end of the 2011 season, when I sat down with the coach, not only did I get, promoted up from a part-time pay, stipend-based pay to a full-time with benefits, but also got obviously the tight ends title as well. And so I always tell people, at 23, I was able to run my own room positionally, and then I was able to recruit my own area, go on the road recruiting, which I think there's two huge hurdles for coaches as they're breaking in to the profession. You got to have someone that believes in you, and give you your first opportunity to do those two things.
Yeah, amen. I think, obviously everybody would jump at the opportunity to go and GA at Clemson and, Nebraska and Texas. But there's some skills that you don't get the opportunity to get. And sometimes it can prolong your getting a full-time role because you never, truly recruited. And, not saying Furman is a small school by any means, but, that was one of my favorite things as a D2 GA was that I ran my own meeting room. I recruited. I had a recruiting area. You just got so much exposure to a lot of things. So there's some great opportunities regardless of where you're at and what the level is, and can help prepare you a little bit quicker. Now in 15, you have another conversation there with your coach. You get the opportunity to kind of go back home, I guess, per se, but maybe you were getting comfortable in that tight end room. I don't know. But you get the opportunity to go back to the defensive side of the ball. Once again, the dialogue around that, how did that come about? Did you see it coming? All those good things that kind of circles that transition.
Yes. So I think, as I was getting, year 3, year 4 into coaching, I knew ultimately I wanted to get on the defensive side of the ball. I just felt my demeanor, I coached with a lot of passion, a lot of energy. Just felt, comfortable with defensive players. And so ultimately that was my goal, was to get back, but I knew I was in such a good situation as a young coach at tight end.
Yeah.
And I knew it was going to be hard for someone outside of Furman to hire me, with zero defensive coaching experience. Now I had the coaching experience on offense, and obviously I had the playing experience on defense. So I was looking for, an opportunity, and, again, just kind of an opportunity with having some staff changes and guys leaving the staff. We were able to, shuffle the staff. And I'll never forget when Coach Fowler came and set me down and, hey, here's kind of what I'm thinking, and just want to make sure you're, interested in it, because if you're not bought into it, it's never going to work, like anything in coaching. And I was 100% excited about it. Got me back home. And it also exposed me to a new scheme, a different scheme than really I'd played in. We were much more of a one-high team that I played in Vanderbilt, a lot of cover 3, man free. And so when I moved to safeties, we were extremely quarters based. So really got a chance to not only coach the position from my playing experience, but also get exposure to a new scheme. And then additionally, I was also able to pick up that recruiting coordinator title, which I kept really for the next, 3 years, 15 through 18.
Right. And, that's interesting that you made that kind of delineation between, that playing experience where you're one high, the guys were rolling down, you had a low safety, high safety type situation versus this quarter-based look. When you make that type of transition to a position that you're extremely comfortable with. Obviously there's some fundamentals that are, you just don't change regardless of kind of what you're doing. But how advantageous was that for you to be able to say, okay, hey, let me go dive into this quarters. We didn't play much of it. I have to go learn. I have to go seek out knowledge in terms of how to coach this to the best of my ability. How did you approach that part of, just being in a brand new scheme, in a position you're comfortable with?
Absolutely. So I'd say first off, at the time, our corners coach at Furman was a defensive back GA at Vanderbilt when I played. So obviously I was able to lean on him very heavily because obviously I thought he had a really good, knowledge background of the system, not only at Vanderbilt that I played in, but also at Furman. And then that's when I, found probably one of my biggest mentors, Chad Staggs, who at the time was the defensive coordinator at Charleston Southern under Jamie Chadwell. And they were doing some really good things down there, running their quarters. They were really good against the option, which if you know much about the SoCon back in the, mid, 2010 to 2020, with Furman, Wofford, Citadel, all running some type of gun or under center option. So I reached out to him. We met on the road recruiting, and I just kind of fostered that relationship. And I remember spent the spring, once I became the safety coach, going down, I think, twice and visiting with him, talking ball. He was the defensive coordinator and safeties coach, and, just learned a lot. And, we'll talk later on, but obviously, that relationship came full circle in 2017 when Coach Hendricks gets the job and, he hires Chad Staggs to come be the defensive coordinator here. So get a chance to really work hand in hand with my mentor.
Well, yeah, that's awesome. Let's kind of actually transition right into that because I think there's a lot there. So in 2016, we had a significant change. Your DC from college, guy that gave you your first job, the guy you've been rolling through the profession with, gave you a couple promotions, moved you around a little bit. He resigns, and for anybody in the profession, that can be a scary time because you truly don't know what's next. You don't know who's going to walk in the building next. You don't know if they're going to retain you or you're going to be out on the job hunt. And I guess just talk to us about that transition leading up and kind of getting through that initial hiring phase of him keeping you on, referring to Coach Hendricks there.
Absolutely. I think one of the best things that helped me kind of regardless of who the next head coach here at Furman was going to be was that I had the recruiting coordinator title. So the administration here chose really two people, myself and Brian Bratton, who is an alum of Furman, in the Hall of Fame here at Furman, now is the assistant receiver coach for the Indianapolis Colts. So we were the two guys kind of chosen to remain on the road recruiting to help kind of keep the recruiting class together during obviously a very unstable time as they were going through the process of interviewing people. So, and obviously while I was doing that, like you said, also was kind of looking at, okay, hey, if things don't work out here at Furman with the new staff, new head coach, so had some irons in the fire. And I'll never forget, got a call from, they kind of narrowed it down to three people. And I was on the road to actually watch our kicker playing the state championship game. And Clay Hendricks gives me a call. Well, actually, Brian gave me a call and kind of said, hey, with the Furman Vandy connections, Coach Hendricks had heard a lot of really good things about you. Obviously, my head coach in college, Bobby Johnson, was a longtime head coach here at Furman before he took the Vanderbilt job. Never personally met Coach Hendricks, but once we got on the phone, I think it became pretty evident that, our values aligned. And, I kind of was open to, I'd done a lot of things again. So it didn't feel like, he could move me around to whatever position. And he kind of told me that when he retained me is, I want to keep you as my recruiting coordinator, and you're going to be a defensive assistant coaching something, and we'll kind of see based on who I hire as DC exactly what position group you'll end up working with.
Oh, that's awesome, man. So during that process, this phone call that happens, I guess, it sounds like the first time you made contact with Coach Hendricks there. You're 25, 26 at the time, maybe somewhere around there, maybe slightly older than that, but you're young. This is the first major transition that you're kind of seeing in the profession. Were you nervous? What were the feelings like as this phone was ringing? You're like, okay, I'm about to find out a lot of stuff here. I don't know how this call is going to go. What were your feelings like going as you hit the answer button?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Was very nervous, taking the call. But I think, anybody that knows, Clay Hendricks just knows what a great man he is. And I think, quickly into that call, I think he put kind of, my anxiety at ease and at rest. And, and we really, quickly, he kind of starts rattling off recruits. And I think probably the best thing that I impressed him with was my knowledge of not just my recruiting areas, but, kind of the typical 5-hour radius around Furman, which we're located in Greenville, South Carolina. And, quickly, because he knew as he was taking the job in late December, he needed to, hustle to be able to, finish up signing a class. And I think I was able to kind of demonstrate to him I was going to be able to be an asset as the recruiting coordinator, being able to get official visits lined up, had a list of guys that we had committed, and then also had some other targets out there. So, like I said, it was really one of those, probably after the first 5 minutes of the conversation, we probably talked 30 or 40 minutes, and it seemed like we'd known each other much, much longer. And so he just made things really comfortable, and we were able to hit the ground running. And, obviously kind of the rest is history.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's interesting, the story you kind of just mentioned there, because, one of my mentors, a guy I worked with for a while, we would hit the road recruiting, and we'll sit in the car together and talk. And he told me a story about, he was at a big school at the time, and head guy got fired, and basically he had these 9-10 guys that were supposed to be on the road recruiting in the meantime. But a lot of people in the industry kind of recognize it's hard to be retained, and the guys were, instead of maybe getting to the 7, 8, 9 high schools a day and finding recruits, a lot of them were kind of networking and making sure they were putting the pieces together for their next job. And he was telling a story about how he just kept his head down pushing and did a really good job recruiting. And basically the head coach came in, he was hired, didn't call any of the guys, but what he did was he called a lot of his personal connections at the high schools in some of the guys' recruiting areas, and like, hey man, have you seen this guy? And they're like, no, we hadn't seen him. Or yeah, we've seen him. And I guess what I'm saying is it was a little bit of a testament that you stayed and got after it, because it would have been very easy and as ugly as this may sound, almost reasonable for you to be a little bit more concerned about your next opportunity, but you would just bloom where you planted, as you mentioned earlier, and just kind of stayed on that grind. How important was that? Not to just be focused about the next thing, but just continue to try to do a good job where you were at.
Oh, I think it was absolutely beneficial, and I think that's just how it's no different than you're in a ball game, and things aren't going your way in the second half, and are you going to continue to coach with the same energy and the same passion when you're down 35-0 in the second half? People notice that, right? I mean, does your defense, does your team play as hard when they're up by 35, when they're down by 35, or when it's a tie ball game heading into overtime? And I think just when you carry that over into the off the field type of stuff, I think people notice, and I think I was fortunate enough to have enough mutual connections, and people spoke, fortunately very highly of me with work ethic and attention to detail. And obviously being a young coach, I think at a small FCS school, the recruiting coordinator, we don't have a recruiting department. I mean, so the recruiting coordinator here is, you're truly planning official visits, coming up with graphics, mailing lists, text lists, phone calls. So, and I think that just got back to Coach Hendricks, and obviously, whenever you come back to, obviously he played here, his alma mater, to have that recruiting coordinator in place, I think it helps make it a very seamless transition. And with me as been the recruiting coordinator for, I think, my 4th year, I had, been involved with every single player on our roster, so I could speak to him not only about the recruiting piece, but also, family dynamics, where kids are from, kind of what makes them tick, what's their personalities like. And I think just being able to convey to him how invaluable that was.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Well, kind of connecting the dots from, your previous answer, you were going down, Charleston Southern to meet with that defensive coordinator. Coach Hendricks tells you, hey, we're going to keep you on. You got a spot. We'll just, figure that out whenever the time arises when I hire my defensive coordinator. It ends up being this guy that you kind of seeked out to learn some quarter stuff, which is fantastic. I think is awesome anytime you take the opportunity, not just to wait for our convention, not just to wait to off season, but just to be very, very direct in your personal growth and your personal and professional development. You go and meet this guy and you develop a relationship. So he gets hired. Kind of what happens next in the dialogue when you find out he's going to be the ball coach or the defensive coordinator there?
Yeah, well, I think I actually want to kind of tell you a little quick side story because obviously, Coach Hendricks, career O-line coach, came in, hired his offensive staff almost immediately, knew exactly what he wanted to do there.
Yeah.
Defensively, he had a couple options. And when he sat down, obviously retained me. I was very thankful and didn't want to rock the boat. And then, it's probably been 2 weeks and he kind of comes by my office and is like, hey, Duane, obviously we're looking for a DC. And he kind of, gives me more of the profile of what he's looking for. And as an O-line coach, he's like, I want a guy that's multi-front, 3 and 4 down. At the time, to win this league, you had to be able to stop the run and stop, obviously, the option balls. So a guy that's, well-versed in defending triple option. And then I think he wanted a fit to Furman, a guy, because it does take a unique coach to come in here and embrace the academic standards we have. And to, this is kind of pre-transfer portal. We're not big in the transfer portal. It's tough for us to get, undergraduate transfers here. And, so I was able to kind of, after a couple of weeks, tell Coach Enders, hey, I've got a guy that I think may fit that profile. And, if you're interested, I can get you in contact with him. And so I was able to kind of facilitate that. And Coach Staggs ended up, interviewing. Coach Hendricks liked him, offered him the job. I knew that if he came, it meant that, hey, he was going to coach safeties and that was going to push me somewhere else. But again, that was something as a young coach to be able to coach a different position. So I slid to outside linebackers, got experience. We'd always been a 4-down front team, both when I played and been on defense at Furman. So again, kind of opened a new exposure of multi-front, 3 and 4 down, kind of the Nate Woody, 3-4 slant and angle defense. So obviously it was, a really good experience for me, not only to be in the room every day with kind of my mentor as a DB guy, but also get put in a new position to learn, how to coach the outside linebackers, which I think just makes you, the more you can do, the more opportunities, you'll be able to, create for yourself down the road.
Absolutely. And obviously you were able to kind of create an opportunity for yourself as your current role as the defensive coordinator. But just once again, I know we kind of hit this at home already because of the tight end transition after playing defensive back for all those years, and then the safeties transition, although a position you were familiar with, but a new scheme. So now once again, you find yourself in a new position, different scheme per se, maybe a little bit different than what you were used to. Immediately, where do you go? You've been driving down to Charleston Southern, but now that you got the guy in the building, were you just leaning on him a little bit to see exactly what he wanted, or were you going to other places for linebacker stuff?
Yeah, so I was very fortunate in this situation. So Coach Staggs ended up hiring Josh Miller, who was his outside linebackers coach at Charleston Southern, to come coach D-line.
Okay.
So literally in the exact same room with me, I had his former outside linebacker coach. So I was able to, as soon as he got hired, really pick his brain. And I'd say I felt very comfortable coaching that field outside backer because of how much one high, rotating down safety stuff we played at Vanderbilt. Where I didn't feel as comfortable was going to be kind of coaching that, boundary outside backer where 75, 80% of the time he's part of the pass rush.
Yeah.
He's having to play a 5 technique, a 9 technique, and really working more of the, the hands, the block to feet, and the pass rush stuff. So that's what I really focused my attention on, just knowing that'd be a little bit more of a weakness for me, and really leaned into that. And, and it's been, good. And now as the defensive coordinator, along with coordinating, I don't coach both outside backers anymore. I coach just that bandit, that boundary outside backer, because I felt like when I was the outside backer coach, they would get, the bandit would get neglected because the spur had so much more to do in coverage and run fit wise.
Oh, absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about that when we get to your when you actually get this DC role, because I'd be curious about a couple things kind of circling, not necessarily the defensive scheme, but a little bit of assignments and stuff on the staff. Now, one role I do want to dive into real fast before we move to your getting promoted to DC is you were the recruiting coordinator from 15 to 19, and we talked a lot about the recruiting over there at Furman already, but what I do want to talk about is 15 from 19, a lot changed in the recruiting landscape, and you've already made it very clear like a lot of that doesn't really apply to you guys, at a place that's going to be high academic, and getting transfers to come in is going to be extremely difficult. I'm sure just with any program, you're still going to have some of the attrition, have some guys leave out. What were those 4 years like, really from start to finish, as you started to see this very, very dramatic shift in recruiting as is? What was it like for you to make sure that you were learning and growing about kind of where everything was going?
Yes. I think all great, organizations, you got to, if you're not evolving, you get stuck in your ways. And I think being a young coach and having young contacts kind of around the country, we try to stay as cutting edge as possible. And then I think, whenever you get ideas from, the Clemsons, the Georgias of the world, it's you take that idea of what they're doing with their manpower, and you kind of, okay, how can we scale it down and do something very similar? And I remember, obviously, that was when I was recruiting coordinator, graphics became a big thing, being able to send custom graphics, custom edits. And so me and the director of football operations just kind of sat down and came up with, a process, a system of how we were going to go about making sure kids were getting at least one graphic from us a week. Obviously becoming very active on social media. That's when Snapchat was even coming out, and just, FaceTiming guys, and just, what could we do to differentiate ourselves from our competition? I'd say even all the way up till 19, and obviously with COVID in 20, I think that was one of the best things our staff did, was quickly pivoting, and we still use them to this day, is use Zoom meetings. Before we ask a kid to come on an unofficial on their own dime, we're going to get on a Zoom with not only the player, but also his parents. So we can start building that relationship face to face. So I think it's just, always looking at, how can you improve? How can you differentiate yourself from your competition?
Yeah. What's interesting, you kind of said this earlier, some of these staffs of not 100, but, 40 guys, 50 guys, where you got a recruiting department with 10 people dedicated to all these things that you're talking about. How can we maximize this? How many graphics can we kick out? Like, how difficult is that? You're trying to make sure your boundary safety is doing his job. You know what I mean? You got your own recruiting area, but you're also trying to stay cutting edge in something that you can't afford to not be cutting edge in, where you can't afford to, slack and fall back. And the recruiting is the reason that you were even retained in the first place. Recruiting is the reason that you guys have success. How are you able to manage that part of it? That's, in ways, the most important part.
Yeah, I think you kind of alluded to it right there at the very end, Mario. I think it goes back to just being able to prioritize. I think that's one of the most key skills today, because every day I walk in the office, there is a forever-ending to-do list. And I don't think I've ever walked out of the office with every single thing checked off. There's always one more recruit you can call, text, reply to an email. And I think you've got to be constantly asking yourself, what's providing the best ROI, return on my investment, with how we spend our time. And like you said, when you don't have the manpower, you've got to make those decisions. I think we kind of have a model around here. It's on our, really all around this building at Furman that says recruit, retain, develop. And so I kind of talk to our guys of, hey, if you're unsure what to do on a given day, make sure you do all three of those. Make sure you do some type of recruiting. Make sure you do something in terms of interacting with your current players, whether it's going to watch them live, having them by for a quick 10, 15-minute meeting where we're talking nothing about football, all about life, what's going on back at home. And then I think it's that development piece. And, that's really, I think, helped our staff be able to kind of stay focused on the big three.
Now let's get into 2019. After 8 years in the program, sharpening your tools, both defensively and then really just as a coach and as a Furman, as a Furman coach, really sharpening your tools of just about everything circling the program. You get an opportunity to be the defensive coordinator. Curiosity, where'd your DC go? Had that opportunity arise, and why were you the man for the job from the head coach's perspective?
Right. So it was, so we do spring ball here very early. So we start usually like early February, like right after signing day. One of the earliest to start in the country. And, there's a bunch of advantages to it in terms of whether you get a guy nicked up, a labrum, you're able to get him back before summer workout. And then, I think the one downside is if you do have some staff turnover. So we were, I think, 4 practices in, and our defensive coordinator, Coach Staggs, got an opportunity to link back up with Jamie Chadwell at Coastal, and he took the opportunity to go be a DC there. And so obviously we're in the middle of spring practice. Coach Hendricks didn't want to delay, spring practice. So he kind of set me down and brought up a interim DC. Well, to me, I felt like I'd already been in that position before, my first year being the quality control / tight ends coach. And I just tried to really, grab the bull by the horns, so to speak, and to, hey, for these next 11 practices, I'm the DC. And, I try not to put too much pressure on myself and just, really kept things rolling and tried to, I think the biggest thing when you get elevated to a position of leadership is, be yourself.
Yeah.
And if you're not going to get the job, can you live with yourself knowing that, hey, you are 100% authentically you? I didn't, love all my mentors, but, that was the one thing I constantly reminded myself was, hey, be you, and do things the way you would want to do it. And I think probably the best thing I've ever heard from a coach was, be that coach that you loved as a player, that you love playing for. Yeah. So that's as I've gotten farther and farther removed from being a young coach in my playing days, try to keep that fresh in my mind.
And so in those 11 days, obviously you're trying to probably keep the important things important, making sure those players are prepared for a season that's going to be looming as soon as the spring ball kind of ends. They're going to go right in this, preparation for that season. But also, you're trying to make sure that you put your own flavor to it. How much wiggle room did you have with changing some things up defensively in those 11 practices, or did you kind of just stick with what you guys have been doing?
Yeah, great question. So I really felt like I just wanted to kind of stick with what we were already planning to do for that spring install terminology. And then also, we'd had some success. I think in 17, we made the playoffs. In 18, we won the conference. So obviously and I think that's another thing that helped me, when you have success previously and someone leaves, obviously it's way much easier to promote somebody up within. So didn't really change a whole lot. And then even that, off season, because it was a quick turnaround into the fall of 2019, my first year as DC, didn't really change the terminology because I didn't want to make the players have to learn new terminology. We had some old players that were pretty experienced.
Yeah.
So really I kept, I'd say the terminology is the same, but I would put, probably a few more pressures, some patterns, some coverages maybe we hadn't done before, but didn't wholesale change hardly anything.
I got you. Now, you mentioned it roll right into the fall. Where's this interim tag at? Is it still on? Did it get pulled off after the season or before the season started?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I guess forgot to mention that. So I think with a couple practices still remaining in the spring, and it came as a complete shock to me. I think that Coach Hendricks kind of pulled the team up after one of the practices and was like, "Hey guys, we've been doing a search and looking around to replace a really good coach, and looked around everywhere and found out that hey, our next guy's right here, standing in this group." So that was definitely a very special moment, just a vote of confidence from your head coach in front of the players and team. And Obviously very appreciative of, really, Bruce Fowler and Clay Hendricks for, them believing in me and giving me roles that, I'd never done before. And I think all coaches will experience this at some point in their career of, getting an opportunity to do something you've never done before, whether it is, like we talked earlier, Mario, about, getting to run your own position meeting room and position group for the first time.
Yeah.
Getting to call plays. And then ultimately, I think one day it's to be a head coach when you need a athletic director to believe in you, that you've demonstrated the skills and the capabilities within your current role and knowing that they will translate and scale up to a bigger role and responsibilities.
No doubt, man. One of my pet peeves about the profession, and it's one of these things that I can just complain about. It's never going to get better because I understand what happens in the pace of the game. Is that it's so hard to stop and smell the roses sometimes. Of you got promoted and it's like, man, this is awesome. I don't know if you're married or not. I got somebody at home and you celebrated with your family. You're super excited, but it's like on the other side of that announcement is 10, 11 teams that you got to go figure out how to stop. You know what I'm saying? You got to make sure you're prepared, all these kind of things. And you just got to get to work, And so I can only imagine how static that you are, especially as you just walked in as an offensive assistant, just trying to figure this whole deal out. And now you're going to be running the side of the ball. What immediately, what had to be done? What did you have to go do? And you had a good thing in place. Sounds like you didn't change too much. So maybe it wasn't as much as I'm thinking, but what did you have to go do to prepare yourself for that upcoming football season?
Yeah, I think the number one thing was I, asked both our offensive coordinator and Coach Hendricks of really in fall camp, could we have as much live call it segments?
Okay.
Because similar to players getting reps, I felt like, hey, I needed to get those reps, being able to, whether we had headsets or not, but I had someone relaying to me personnel down and distance and me being able to get the call in. Because I think that, I always say game planning, you've got, I don't say all the time in the world, right? But you're not under a time crunch. But come Saturday, you're playing an up-tempo team and they're lining up on the ball fast and you got to get a call in quick. It's definitely underrated until you finally are in that position. So we tried to, even if we were just in a thud tempo as a team and we weren't even tackling to the ground, instead of scripting stuff, I'd say that first fall camp I became defensive coordinator, we did way more call it.
Okay.
So I'm calling it from the hip, offensive coordinator's calling it from the hip to get those reps and experience to help me out when the actual season started.
All right. And you may mention a little bit earlier about once you became DC, and I don't know if it was immediate or you kind of learned this over time, but you end up only taking the boundary backer as your responsibility. Also in this whole transition of Stag going to Coastal Carolina, the safeties position also comes open. So how did you kind of move everything around for you to be in an optimal position to still, maybe have a position if you wanted it or not, but be able to be a great DC? Like how did you go about managing the defensive staff at that point?
Right. I'd say probably with my background experience, having coached a bunch of different positions, what I've learned when I got in a position of leadership and was able to be involved in hiring my position coaches, I wanted to be able to, as much as possible, go hire the best coach and not pigeonhole myself for any hire saying, well, it's got to be a corners coach or it's got to be a outside backer coach. So we were able to really, I think, expand our pool and say, okay, let's go find the best available coach. And if the best available coach was an outside backers coach at the time, I probably would have slid back and coached safety.
Yeah.
And I just think, having that flexibility among your staff so you can shuffle pieces around, really no different than you look at some of the best defenses. When you have players that can do a lot of different stuff, you can be very flexible and how can you get your best 11 on the field? I think of it the same way. How can I get the 5 best, coaches in my defensive staff room? Was able to hire, as soon as I became defensive coordinator, Carrico Wright, who's now the DB coach, pass game coordinator for Delaware, and then Rod Ojon, who's now the corners coach for Indiana. And, they were awesome young coaches, knew I wasn't going to be able to keep them for very long. And they came in and did a tremendous job in the back end. So allowed me to kind of focus my attention on the front seven.
Yeah, for sure. Now let me ask you this question here. I'm gonna ask it in an odd way here. My first time coaching college ball was in a box, and my responsibility was to basically chart what was going on, whatever that meant, to my young self. And my first mistake was I watched it like a football game, and my offensive coordinator is asking for feedback. He's asking who missed a block on the inside zone. I'm like, shoot, I don't know. It was a lot going on for a young first time guy in the box, and probably my last time. And even now when I watch college games, I'm like, oh shoot, it was counter. The guard fell down. It was quarters coverage. They were bringing a blitz. You know what I'm saying? Like I just see it so much differently. What specifically with the eyes, because this is the first time now that you're not just watching your two backers or watching your two safeties or watching your one to maybe sometimes two tight ends. And maybe you're not watching all 11. But what was interesting about your eyes the first year, and versus now, if anything has changed?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, and I remember, just Coach Staggs talking about this, where the ball would be on the far hash, and there'd be a run that would pop. And like I said, he was so familiar with the scheme that he would basically be able to narrow it down to, hey, either the three techniques got reached or the linebacker didn't pump his gap, and then sure enough, we'd get back in, whether it was practice or a game, and sure enough, you turn the film and yep, it was right.
Yeah.
And similar to kind of what I talked about earlier with, practice calling it, what I would do knowing we have some young coaches, as much as possible, spring practice and fall camp, we would put those guys up in the box, and I would tell them like, hey guys, like, we wouldn't quite grade it, but it was like, hey, tell me what happened after each play. So then we'd immediately watch the film as a staff and kind of be able to say, okay, hey, we're batting 75, 80%, because, up until really this off season right now, college football has been the only level of football where you're not allowed to have the tablets on the sideline.
Yeah.
So I think, the better your staff is at being able to identify breakdowns, what's happening, how are they attacking you, who's not performing their job correctly within the defense, is paramount for a staff. Because you don't have that added feature. Now, obviously, we will start being able to implement that this coming season with the technology changes. But that's something, again, I think that sometimes goes, underutilized in practice.
No doubt.
We're player focused, but us as coaches, we need reps as well. Like I said, whether it is the coordinator calling it or whether it is young coaches that are in the box for the first time. I spent my first 6 years up in the press box, and you're spot on what you said. That was exactly how it was the first time, coaching those tight ends. I was supposed to watch the backside of the O-line, and constantly found myself watching the football and had to really, work at it to be able to have that eye discipline, just like we talked about wanting our players to have that eye discipline.
Yeah. There's no doubt. I think just some of the entry level development and those early years, like I do think as a profession as a whole, and been over education here at the AFCA, man, I want to find some ways to just help those guys out a little bit. Because, a lot of times we walk into the box and we're not going to be fortunate enough, as you mentioned, to simulate these reps that happen on game day for our own selves. And we end up with poor communication. And it takes time and we become good at it. But, why not be good immediately if you can be a little bit better prepared for it. And that kind of spurred me into a question I didn't have here before I hop off with you. You mentioned this introduction to technology, so we got all these people that are trying to figure out what's about to happen. Not what's about to happen. Obviously, like you said, the league has been doing it for a long time, but this is going to be new for a lot of guys. Have you actively had discussions about how you're approaching, using that tech on the sideline and the feedback and the route it gets back to you and when you're going to go watch it or whatever? Have y'all had those type of discussions yet or practiced it at all?
We've not practiced it, but we plan on practicing it this fall. And I know other staffs did, use it this spring, but with us going kind of early in the spring, weren't able to use it. We're not going to mess with the headset communication because, most teams are no huddle. Well, if teams are no huddle, then as a defense, you're not going to be able to get all 11 guys, right over the ball like you see in the NFL or you see old school huddle football.
Yeah.
So we're still going to rely on obviously signaling everything defensively, but I do think just, you're able to kind of clear out that gray area of relying on a player. And I think we've really put a high importance in the past on our players of, hey, it's okay if you were wrong, but what we can't afford, for you to lie about something, and hey, if you were out of gap, own up to it. So we're able to not chase the ghost. And I think just getting those still shots and being able to, show us exactly kind of what the breakdown is. So that, because the worst thing you want to do is you come in Sunday morning after a game, you thought it was one issue, in reality it was another. And I think it's just going to increase the overall quality of the game from both sides of the ball, which I'm excited about. And I think it's a really good, rule that every other level of football has been using, and really excited that our level has decided to, follow suit.
Amen. Amen. Well, let me ask you one last DC question, and then we'll talk about 35 and 35 when I get you out of here, man. But 2024, Coach Vaughn walking into this football season versus, were you the DC in 2019 or was that your first season, 19?
That was my first season.
Okay, so versus 2019 defensive coordinator Coach Vaughn, what are some differences that internally, like confidence or just ability to recognize issues quickly? How have you grown in those years?
Yeah, I think just my game day demeanor. Players are going to respond to it. They're going to look to us, right, in an adverse situation. And I think just being able to handle the adversity that's coming. I mean, it's just with the nature of offenses being, whether it's, the space, the tempo, the speed, all the things that give us problems. When we do give up, a play, a touchdown, I think just my sideline demeanor has grown tremendously. And then I think, just the in-game adjustments. And being able to quickly pivot from, maybe we're doing one thing and doing another. And then I think just scheme-wise really learned, hey, offensive coordinators are looking for those guaranteed coverage checks. Hey, if we get you an unbalanced, we're going to get one thing. If we get you an empty. And I think it's easy as a young coach to, okay, hey, let's just AFC this, automatic formation check this.
Yeah.
Because they don't do it a lot. Well, what I found in 2019 was we did that, and a team that only been an empty 4 times for the years realized we're playing one thing to empty, and guess what? They're teeing off on us an empty. And just being able to, hey, we want to show multiple looks no matter what the formation is, and we don't want to let them talk us into or out of a pressure based on formation, set, so forth, so on. And, because at the end of the day, it's a cat and mouse game, and we're trying to escape when that clock hits 0, that they're like, because they're constantly trying to just, play the chess game of, all right, how can I get, my best matchup? And then I think it's, how do you move the stress around, right? We're not going to live in a quarters world, because in a quarters world, those corners are on islands. I mean, if 2's vertical, the corner's got all of 1. So, how can we throw numbers to coverage? How can we throw numbers to our run fit? How can we change that picture post snap on the quarterback? But definitely feel very comfortable in the role. And I think just the in game stuff, being able to know where the breakdowns are coming from, even if I didn't see it, I really feel like that's grown tremendously. And last thing I'd add about that, Mario, is I was so fortunate. Obviously, it was a terrible time. The COVID lockdown, quarantine time. But, people always say you make your biggest strides as a coach or player after your first year.
Yeah.
And not only, right, so my first year is DC 2019. And then I really get to look back and examine what went good, what went bad, how can we improve in that off season. And then obviously that led into a long, we didn't play in the 2020 fall, we played in the spring. So I almost got 2 off seasons to really self-assess. And I just feel like that is, has been huge in my overall development as a defensive coordinator, our scheme, our system that we run here at Furman.
Coach, I appreciate you sharing. Now, before I let you go here, You were part of our last I believe it was 2024 35 under 35 class, and I just wanted to ask, what did it mean to you, and why is it important that people apply for this?
Absolutely. It was one of the best experiences of my coaching life, and just the amount of information I gathered in that one day from, I believe we were there from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m., whether it was former members of the 35 under 35 coming back and speaking to us, having an agent panel, having even a financial guy come talk to us, and then the continued connections. I'd say it's been one of the coolest things. I've done multiple Zooms with other coaches that was part of my class. We're constantly bouncing ideas off of each other, because I think that's the neat thing in this profession is, when you're not in the same, you're not in the same conference as some of these guys, it's way easier to kind of bounce ideas. And I've even had some Zooms with some of the offensive guys. Yeah. Mac Leftwich is a guy that I coached against in the 2022 playoffs when he was in Incarnate Word with DJ Kinney. And we're both in that class, and he's become a good friend of mine. And, we're able to, hey, what do you think from a defense perspective about this? And kind of, do a little chalk talk and kind of bounce ideas off each other. So it's been, couldn't encourage it more for guys. I think it's one of the best things to do as a young coach, to apply to it and to be part of it, and to really lean into everything that the AFCA does, because just so appreciative. I think as a coach that's only been one place, I know the challenge for me has been, okay, I'm not around a bunch of as many people, schemes, ways of doing things. So I've got to rely on being able to set up Zooms, go on visits, so that I don't get stuck in my ways, and I'm able to see new ways of doing things and deciding what can I implement for our own program.
Amen, Coach. Well, I appreciate you being a part of the program and continue to elevate what we're, our expectations of guys that get into it with everything that you're doing, in your personal life and there at Furman. Before I let you go, I want to give you the opportunity to share your social media. If anybody wants to follow up this podcast and ask you some questions, or, just keep up with your journey, they can do so.
Yeah, so my Twitter handle is going to be at Coach. Let me pull it up and make sure. Yeah, at Coach_D Vaughn on Twitter. Very active on there. I keep my DMs open. So again, like I said, please reach out to me. Always looking to connect. Been doing probably 4 or 5 Zooms already this late spring and summer with high school guys. Just love talking ball. And our place, we're an open door policy. So anybody that's in the area or passing through Greenville, South Carolina, that wants to come by, talk ball, or talk drill work with anybody on our staff, we would love to have that happen.
Absolutely, Coach. Well, we'll make sure to link that in the show notes, make it easy for guys to follow you, keep up with you, and ask questions. And, man, best of luck to you. I look forward to seeing you in 25, okay, man?
All right. Appreciate you, Mario. Really appreciate you putting this together.
Yeah, amen, brother. I'll see you soon, okay?
All right. See ya.
CoachComm has been delivering tough headsets for tough teams for more than 31 years. It's why 97% of FBS teams and thousands of high schools across the country rely on CoachComm. Get the best for your team. Visit CoachComm.com for more info.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Inside the Headset, presented by CoachComm. If you'd like to learn more about this week's episode, head over to AFCA.com. There, you can access every episode and find corresponding show notes. Remember, you can catch every episode of Inside the Headset presented by CoachComm on wherever you get your podcasts, including Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. While you're there, we'd love for you to take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Your feedback helps us improve and grow. Keep up with the latest news by following us on social media. Connect with us at Inside the Headset, and remember to tag us when you share your favorite episodes. For more updates on all things AFCA, be sure to follow the @WeAreAFCA social media accounts. If you're not a part of the AFCA community yet, Visit AFCA.com to join thousands of NFL, college, and high school coaches nationwide and across the globe. Elevate your coaching game with an AFCA membership. You'll gain exclusive access to the annual AFCA convention, magazine, digital library, and AFCA Insider email. Stay up to date with the latest stories and news on the AFCA website. More than just a convention, the AFCA offers continuous education, guidance, networking, and more. Celebrate the past and shape the future with the AFCA. It's about fostering exceptional coaches who create outstanding teams and even better individuals. Invest in your skills and make a lasting impact today by engaging with the AFCA. Your journey starts here.